Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of ITWeb TV. My name is Chris Tredger. We are coming to you live from Cape Town, a glorious day in Cape Town, ahead of the ITWeb Security Summit tomorrow at the ITWC. With me, I have one of the keynote speakers, Dr. Martin Koyabe. He's the Senior Manager and Technology Lead at the Global Forum of Cyber Expertise. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. Beautiful talk.
It's going to be a very interesting day tomorrow, and I know that you're in the lineup as a keynote speaker. Can you just give us an idea of where you think Africa is from a digital transformation point of view?
Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, coming here, we are following up on a number of initiatives that are going on in the continent. Many African countries, as you might be aware, are already embarking on what we call the digital transformation programs. We are seeing quite a lot, especially both in the regions, especially when you look at the SADC region, where we are at the moment. Most of the SADC member states are developing digital programs. They're making sure that their infrastructure is secure and resilient. They're doing a lot of awareness within the digital programs. So the digital transformation programs are really going on within the continent. The reason for this is really pushed by a number of factors. So you find we are digitally decadent, providing services over digital platform. Most of our services are going to be digital in the future. We are encouraging inter-country communication and trade from a digital platform. So therefore, the digital services and the push for people accessing these services is really pushing that digital transformation. Secondly, it's the issue of efficiency and scaling. So you find that most of these service countries, many people, when many of those countries actually do that digitalization. And therefore, it's important that we think about how security and cybersecurity can be mitigated when you have a digital transformation program of this particular scale. And then, of course, with the emerging threats that we are seeing, it's also really threatening the digital infrastructure. And so our question is, how do we secure the digital infrastructure, but at the same time, do what we call the expansion of these transformation projects?
Right, and that actually brings me to an interesting area of the conversation, which is there are pockets of progress from a digitalization point of view in Africa. There are success stories of how Africa is actually pushing its own agenda and its own transformation agenda. But of course, cybersecurity is a threat. Can you tell me a little bit about what are the most important or the most serious threats impacting Africa at the moment from a cybersecurity point of view?
So when you look at the African landscape, Africa is becoming not only a player, but a dependable source of cost when you look at it from the global perspective. Many countries are increasing their trade. Many countries are attracting investments, whether it is from the financial sector, manufacturing sector, the energy sector, and many other sectors. What that means then, it becomes an attractive target for cybersecurity threats. When you look at the AfriPol report, it was produced, I think, a year or two ago. It actually puts Somalia as one of the highest cyber channels or vectors that we're seeing within the continent. The question is, how are we able to protect the citizens, communities, infrastructure, and so forth from ransomware? We are seeing an increased attacks on the digital platform that supports mobile technology. There's a lot of attacks in those particular sectors. Data breaches are quite an increase. And again, some of these are not necessarily caused by what you'd call a big surge in attack. Some of them are just mistakes that are made because people don't match their systems and so forth. And then what we're also seeing is an increasing social engineering, where many attackers use social engineering to get as much data that they can. So the more data that you have of a specific resource or a specific department, a specific institution, the better, because then you can take decisions that could affect a number of people. Just to come back to your point, there is a surge in cyber attacks targeting the continent. There are specific countries that have realized this, and they are putting mitigation mechanisms, making sure that their IT systems are well in check, making sure that policies are well in check. So,
right. So, and it also raises the kind of issues that Africa is dealing with. We know, for example, that you've also spoken about this before, but that there is a need for more investment in digital infrastructure in Africa, that the acute shortage of cybersecurity skills is also a big factor. Taking that into consideration, we've also run we actually ran a story fairly recently with research that suggested that in South Africa, 17.5% of internet users, which equates to 8.75 million people, were exposed to threats in the first 3 months of this year. In Nigeria, it was 17.5%, which is 19 people. So you look at those kind of statistics, and you consider the challenges that Africa is still dealing with. Where are we going in terms of how we're managing the situation?
So if you look at, let me break it down into two parts. So the truth of the matter, as you rightly say, most of us are online. We are depending on the digital infrastructure for accessing services, providing services, and so forth. Yeah. What that means then is that many of us are vulnerable because of one reason or the other, and being dependent on the digital infrastructure. We are also seeing an increase on mobile services. Therefore, many of us, again, because we are depending on those services, we are sort of like susceptible to this kind of attacks. And therefore, the figures that they've given for South Africa, Nigeria, we've seen so many figures even in Kenya, others in other parts of life in the Northern African region and other destinations where there's a specific number of attacks is happening. What we see in the market is that there are roughly about 4 million what you call vacancies, or where we get the kind of cybersecurity experts in the market. Now, these 4 million people who are expected to fill in this gap in the market are people who could be the ones that would be able to be able to facilitate what you call the human resource that is needed for institutions to be able to protect themselves because of the capacity, that is needed for human resource. But this capacity also is because of the gap is because of many bigger institutions they can afford to pay a higher salary for these experts from maybe small to medium enterprises or even startups. So you find that the gap of cybersecurity experts keeps increasing, but it's not being closed enough, as in we are not really filling it up because of this movement of resource person from one organization to the other. The other point also is the issue around how do we maintain human resource in the capacity that we need in institutions that matter, whether it's in the financial sector, in the government sector, in the private sector. There's a need for companies and institutions, as I talked about this earlier at some point, to be able to encourage and have what we call loyalty of employees being able to work along the side. So the human resource capacity is affected in that way. There's incentivization, which is required. We also need to train more people in specific areas like emerging technology, AI threats, and so forth to understand how to mitigate that. We need also to share information more. So many of the African countries need to share information. We are seeing an increase in certs, national certs, coming together at regional level to coordinate information share. And this is an encouraging trend, as we see a lot. We're also seeing the national cybersecurity agencies and authorities coming together to form an association. So there's an association called Anchor, which was established a few years ago. It's actually based the Smart Africa Secretariat, with countries such as Ghana, Morocco, and others and Rwanda being players in this particular association. And that is a good thing, because what that means, it can be able to bring together information sharing at a greater scale so that we can mitigate threats as we go along. Right. So to come back to your point, there are specific measures that need to be taken. One, of course, is the human resource for us to train people, maintain people, and be able to target emerging threats as a subject matter to be trained on. We need also to increase sharing of information. across boundaries, countries at regional level, but also at continental level. But more importantly, is for many of the African countries to start putting together what we call these national cybersecurity strategies, right, that they need either to review and update their strategies, or even in some cases, implement or establish a strategy. We are seeing that within the national, at the continental level, at the AU level, we now have what we call continental national cybersecurity strategy, which countries can be able to adapt and then be able to implement in their own, with their own priorities. We have also seen that the continent has come up with what we call the AI continental strategy, which will enable countries to know exactly what sort of policies, what sort of instruments or institutions that should be able to adopt AI in their boundaries, and that is good for the region. And also, we are seeing that the Malabo Convention needs to be implemented. Of course, many countries ratified it to the minimum that was required, which was June last year, which is fine. But now we need to move more into the implementation. And therefore, countries such as South Africa should look at the Malabo Convention and look at areas where they can be able to implement what that convention is all about. We know it needs to be updated, but that, having said, or rather saying that, we need actually to make sure that the convention, the tenets that are within that convention are implemented by the United States.
Excellent. And Dr. Koyabe, thank you very much. I think it's going to be an excellent presentation tomorrow. There's going to be a lot to consider, food for thought. Do you have any sort of last final words that you'd like to get out before your keynote tomorrow? Any major statements that you'd like to make?
I think that's a good one, because I'm sure that we'll be talking to industry leaders. We'll be talking to the private sector. My call will be to make sure that we increase more of the private-public partnership that should be encouraged, so that the private sector, which is very huge in South Africa, for example, could bring in the expertise, it could bring in the resources. And my call is for governments that are hearing this and any other players that are out there to really have these PPP engagements as a way of complementing the gaps that we are seeing in cybersecurity. And then secondly, I think Africa has a very big chance because of its human resource. The people in the continent are its best defense, if you ask it. So if there are governments out there that are thinking of investing in their human resource, I think this is the chance for them to do that, especially the young people who are upcoming. We need to invest in our human resources. And then finally, there is the issue of investment, which you talked about.
Yes.
We've talked about the government putting more money on cyber, but also there has to be, and this is Chris out to say, the political will. Yeah. The political will has to be in place so that what we are going to talk about tomorrow and what we're going to be calling for tomorrow should be able to see the light of the day. So the political will is one of the key major factors in this discussion today.
Excellent. Dr. Koyabe, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to your presentation tomorrow and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again.